All right. Those lights are blinding. Come on out. Jim and John, I have a very distinguished panel. Hope you guys are ready to talk security. I can't see you, so you're just going to have to, I'm going to pretend that you're all just completely enamored and intrigued and excited about this entire topic. So we'll do quick introductions. As she said, my name's Margaret Dawson. I work for Red Hat. Been in security or related to security for many years, starting back in the day in more networking, network security, cloud security, and now my team does a lot of the go-to-market strategy for Red Hat's open source and overall security strategy. So, Jim?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Rivas. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Security Alliance. We're a global not-for-profit organization that does research on the security best practices needed for cloud computing, IoT, and any sort of next-generation IT. So happy to be here.
Great. John?
My name's John Bandler. I started out in law enforcement for 20 years. I was a state trooper in New York State for 8 years, law school. Then I joined the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, a local prosecutor's office, but it has very long arms, so I was prosecuting cybercrime. And I left there about 1.5 years ago. I started my own law firm and consulting company, so I investigate cybercrime, and I try to protect people from cybercrime and other fraud and crime.
Excellent. So remember that. Maybe he can help you. So let's start with you, John. So we've talked a lot about this week going through transformation, whether we call it digital transformation or all the changes that we're seeing in the industry. And I guess my first question to you is, who do you think is most at risk as we're making all these changes and going into these new technology areas?
So I think everybody is at risk. Every person who has some kind of digital presence, a device, an email account, is all at risk because the cybercrime economy is out there and it doesn't discriminate. I like to think of it as water trying to get into your house or into your boat. If there's any crack, it'll try to get in. And also there's the elite types of cyber criminals who, like the Delta Force or whatever, that will try to get in and break in. So I think as a person, we're all at risk. I think a lot of the people in this room who you're doing a lot of business, you're sending payments, you're in the data center or fiber business where you're sitting on a lot of data, and in the cybercrime economy, you might not think that data can be used by a criminal, but they can use it. So you're kind of guarding that Fort Knox. And there's a lot of people, nation states, elite cyber criminals that would want it. And even just that run-of-the-mill cyber criminal. Your email accounts, if they're hacked, you'd be surprised at the ways they can make money on that, which can be devastating for your business. And if you're running a data center, if they are able to manipulate it, manipulate your HVAC so that it's no longer cooling things, that could be devastating. And think of the reputational harm with that. And
Right.
Criminals now know, I don't mean to keep going, but criminals now know that even if your data is hard for them to monetize, they know how much value it has to you. So there's not only keeping it confidential, but making sure it's available to you. So that's this whole ransomware trend that's happening with little bits of data, but imagine your data center if they try to ransom you and if they're in your network and all of a sudden you can't keep things cool. It could be devastating.
And we'll talk more about data protection. So, okay, so that's good news. So we're all screwed. So that's a happy thought as we keep going here. But so if everyone is at risk, Jim, what can we do? What should we start thinking about right now?
Well, it's very important, I think, to start thinking more about scale, because we have to understand it's just vastness. And yes, things can look grim, but also it's just so empowering, and technology is solving so many problems. There's so many good things that are happening. But so Mark Andreessen, who invented the first web browser, he said in 20 years, every physical item will have a computer chip. And you look at the scale which things like cloud are growing, it's just huge. So we have to be thinking about how do we do these things and not just think about, I can identify every specific device that's maybe on my network. We have to think about how can we look at trends, how can we find strategies that will allow us to deal with problems very quickly. Networks form and reform almost instantaneously for any sort of issue. Criminals can find and create a new botnet just on demand that has a new mission, new objective. So it's really important that we think about things like identity management and analytics and big data, and also be realistic on prioritizing where our assets are, where our most important assets, and how do we respond very quickly to a rapidly changing world.
So we were talking yesterday a little bit, and we talked about going back to fundamentals, and that while we're doing security in many new ways, we have all these edge devices, and there's this data proliferation. What should we be thinking about when we say fundamentals? What does that really mean?
Well, I think for one, understand where your critical assets are. I mean, risk management, risk assessments, and understanding, okay, key data assets that without which my organization will cease to exist. Where are those? How are those protected? And a lot of organizations, this was a Forrester thing, but they talked about zero trust networks and things like that, where you go back to sort of the core. Let's protect those key assets. And I personally believe things like being able to deliver security through cloud and as a service, which I think network operators are very well positioned to do, those become very important. A couple other things are two-factor authentication. You need that everywhere. Encryption is going to be good for the next 8 to 10 years until quantum computing takes over, and then we're really screwed. So that's a very important thing to implement now. And then just a lot more delving into the analytics and those sorts of areas. So again, you can be situationally more aware and more agile.
That's great. Is there any fundamental things that you think about?
Well, I think starting with the basics, definitely two-factor authentication, because if that person from whatever country has got your username and password, which there are a lot of ways to get that. So if they're trying to sign in their country as you, they have your username and password, and if you don't have that two-factor authentication enabled, then they can be you. And even just with your email account, you'd be surprised what they can do with that. The FBI calls it business email compromise, or CFO fraud, or CEO fraud, where they're misdirecting bank wires, and they're very sophisticated with how they do that, and they're the participants in this scheme, it's very segmented, but they can launder money very quickly to another country and you don't get it back, so they're misdirecting a payment. And I think just doing the basics, I think a lot of people are intimidated with a lot of the standards, but a lot of people fail to just get started and do the basics, protecting your devices, the two-factor authentication. And when you don't do the basics and then something bad happens, it doesn't read well in the press. When you have to notify people, when you're sued, it doesn't sound good in that opening statement when you're being sued for having bad security, that you left your device in the bar at 1 a.m. and it didn't have a password.
No one's done
it.
that this week, right? Okay.
So.
Good. And train your CEOs. I was just thinking when you said that I read some study not long ago that oftentimes, CEOs are the biggest security risk for a lot of organizations because, they just don't think about their own security. So if there's CEOs in the room, sorry, but you especially.
And sometimes just getting back to that face-to-face. We all have devices and are sending emails and texts, but when payments are concerned, you're directing someone to make a payment or authorizing a payment. The one good thing about cybercrime is that it's bringing people back to talk face-to-face. So instead of just having an email conversation, have a verbal conversation too. A little bit of chit-chat, make sure you know who you're talking to. It's not a sophisticated impersonator. And that oral confirmation can save you a lot of headache.
I think the problem, though, is so much of the fraud and attacks and things are going to happen machine to machine in the future. I mean, right now there's maybe 8 billion or so individuals in the world and maybe 10 billion or so internet-connected devices. We're going pretty closely to about 250 billion, and so much of the fraud is going to be these rules that are baked into machines and things. And so it's going to be very important that we're looking at the analytics, we're looking at trends, we're looking at the exceptions, or all those things. So yes, do the basics, but you got to do them much faster and using new ways and new tools to think about how you do that. And you aren't going to be able to say, hey, this is my network as a network operator. I'm going to be able to control the devices that are on there. There's going to be a proliferation of devices you've never heard of, different operating systems, different purposes, different missions, no human interface on them. And so those are the things we got to be ready for.
You know, one thing we didn't talk about, and you and I used to talk about this back in 2008 when you first started CSA. And when I talk to a lot of CISOs or CIOs, one of the things I always bring up is just security policies. I'm always amazed at how many companies, you know, haven't either updated or kept a strong, you know, security policy process, whether it be for their existing network or data center or as they're moving to cloud or whatever, and really looking at access controls and, you know, really basic stuff that you need to be thinking about and refreshing on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, it's something that, you know, we try to preach more, and that's why if industry doesn't do it, then every government and every country and every industry will do that for you and make a lot of those requirements. But you know,
Right.
the things that will, for example, just create some compartmentalization so you don't have a single person with sort of God access to everything, and separation of duties and all these sorts of things, people don't think through, and there's a lot of good models. We have it at the CCM inside of Cloud Security Alliance. There's ISO 27001. There's a lot of things you can point to that provide a good body of knowledge at a high level, and then you just got to figure out what are the best technical controls to implement that on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's different regulations everywhere. Even PCI compliance, if you're not even in a retail, necessarily has some great guidelines, you know, from basic policy controls. So let's move on to some technologies. We've talked a lot this week about software-defined networking, software-defined data centers, whatever, the agility, the innovation around that, but it also kind of changes the attack vector, you could say. Is there anything specifically that you are consulting or thinking about as we're moving from more physical to this, you know, software-defined world?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand that existing network architectures, even if they're represented in a software-defined way, are changing pretty fundamentally. And so we have to go from our physical view of controls to very virtual. But if you are familiar with things like Amazon Lambda, for example, and some of these things that might fit under a broader category of microservices, what it is saying is the network architecture is changing. It's not like a virtual server or virtual machine, things like that. So we have to think in new ways about those architectures. And again, I go back to things like, you know, strong identity. That's how we're going to be able to understand a lot of the different unique hybrid devices. I think of every user, every application, every data store, every device, every virtual instance, every Docker container, they all need an identity, they all need a digital certificate, and that's how we can start to assemble these in a more coherent way. But it's going from and leaving the physical security controls behind and being able to build a virtual, for example, virtual private cloud that is so secure you could put it in your enemy's network and they wouldn't even be able to access it. That's kind of how we need to be thinking about things.
Interesting.
I would just add to that for everything we create, the bad guys are going to figure out a way to misuse it or break into it, and certainly virtual or software defined is where a lot is going. But I know in my home I have a RAID and it's connected with an Ethernet cable, and I know that when I unplug that Ethernet cable, no one from outside my home can possibly get in there. But when you have a software switch or connection, it's possible. And if that hacker figures out a way or gets the privileges or is able to hack in as that administrator, you have to be able to watch for that.
So I just read a book, and one of the lines, I forget who said it, but to me it really pertains to how technology is shifting. It said, if you've invented the airplane, you've invented the airplane crash. And if you think of any new technology that you need to go implement, we need to look at what is the downside, what is the countermeasure that the hacker's going to have. It's not a reason not to do it. You have to do it, but we have to understand, we have to think like that other side, because they don't use our tools the way we intend them to be used. They have a completely different purpose for the tools and the technologies that you're going to be rolling out.
And that's
It's even different than CI/CD. I mean, it's almost taking it a step before, assuming security issues as we're building the software.
Yeah, we want to build it in. It's really hard with like IoT devices that are so very cheap. They're sold by weight versus by the individual IDs, but that's what we need to be thinking about.
And that's security by design and privacy by design, which is when you're building it and you're innovative and trying to come up with new things to sell and make people's lives better. But if you think of security afterwards and try to bolt it on, or privacy afterwards, that can be a problem. You want to think about it as you're innovating.
But one of the things, and as I'm thinking of this question, start thinking about your questions. We'll open it up to the audience. We'll make this interactive. So if you have questions, there's a couple mics, I think, roaming. Yes? So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. So how do we think about if we're, this is always the dilemma between, making it secure, locking things down, having those controls, and then user experience, customer experience. And one of the things we all have to be thinking about is both the experience for our own internal developers and internal employees, but also for our end customers and how easy we're making it to access our technology and services that we're providing. So how do you think about that balance and still having that wonderful customer experience?
Well, I think that we want security as much as possible to sort of disappear into the background in how we do things. And again, I think things like if you do have the ability to do very strong authentication of different devices and different people, and they go through and they do that once, and maybe you're federating IDs, so there's 1,000 different applications that someone needs to access, but by authenticating once, they don't have to continue to log in again. That's where security actually makes things more usable and enhances the user experience. It lets people focus more on the business they're trying to do versus going through all these different security gates. So we do need that sort of Apple elegant design into thinking through some of the security practices we do. And I think that's, again, that's very achievable for us to do that.
And I would just say that for the user experience, I would hope that people, the users, start to value security and privacy more, and maybe that can be a selling point to the users. If you look at the privacy policies today, I'd be surprised if anyone here has ever read a privacy policy, never mind the thousands that you've clicked and agreed to. So that's pretty much unworkable now, that people are agreeing to privacy policies that they don't read and don't understand. And most companies don't understand their own policies either.
I think if you make a system idiot-proof, someone's going to build a better idiot. I think that it's just going to be so hard for us to rely. People do become the weak link in a lot of these systems, and that's where, again, we've got to see anomalies. We got to do these all these other actions to be able to quickly find where those problems are.
Yeah. You just said something that made me think of a different area, which is security, rather than always thinking about the risk of it, but more the revenue opportunity. So security as a service, or how can these organizations in the audience be thinking about, seeing security as a premium offering, or somehow making it something that is a competitive differentiator as opposed to just a control point?
So I would argue that as a company, you want to be a company that lets your customers know that you value their security and their privacy. You're taking it seriously. It's not just lip service that you have the best security. And certainly if you were a company that was breached or had an outage, that would be devastating for your reputation. As far as security as a service, I think that becomes a difficult area, because every company selling security as a service or as a product, they say their product is the best. It will save you from everything. It's easy to use. You look at these identity theft monitoring services. They say it'll protect you and everything will be great for you. In reality, that's not always the truth, and it becomes hard for the consumer to pick what's good for them.
So a couple thoughts on here, and one thing is, having spent a lot of time with the really big cloud providers like Amazon, AWS, Microsoft, Azure, they do a phenomenal job with security, and they've made this decision, instead of making it an extra value add, we're going to have a pretty high baseline of security for everyone. And in cloud at scale, you're able to do more and more of that, and I feel like they are raising a baseline there. But when you get outside of these very sophisticated managed clouds to all the rest of IT that's out there, I think what we're going to see is we're going to change the model of the internet, where it's very flat. you get your IP address, you basically can see everything, and then you authenticate. I think what we're going to move towards is more of this micro-segmentation is something you hear about, but I think you're going to see more of this walled gardens inside of there where you basically authenticate first, and then you see what's visible. And I think from a telco operator perspective, I think there are opportunities there to actually be managing these more secure walled gardens and letting organizations that maybe are wanting to put some very sensitive information in these areas, or they are just in a type of business that requires a lot more security, that there will be an opportunity to upsell more of these areas around these micro-segment and walled gardens and delivering more security as a service in that way.
I think it's also around core competency. You know, as we look across the changes in this industry, and there's so many different areas of business and technology that these organizations are going into, you know, I think about it as, you know, you may not want to stay in a business where, you know, you're doing all your data center build out yourself. You know, you're working with some of these people where that becomes their core competency, and you're in a different part of the supply chain. So I think there's a strategic element to this in terms of what you're going to focus on, and security is one of those kind of drivers or whatnot, you know, that goes into that.
Yeah, I think businesses already, I mean, all the Fortune 500 I talk to, they've made this commitment that they're getting out of the IT business, and their IT people and their information security people are migrating more to being analysts, more on the application layer and understanding how to take this ubiquity of technology and how to combine it into business applications that actually...
It's more of a services organization, really, than
yeah, and it's
the
moving away
infrastructure.
from that core competency. And there's a blog I've been meaning to write about something called self-driving information security, and I think so much of that more horizontal IT and information security is going to get much more automated. Even things today, we think of security analysts that are fairly sophisticated people, they're just going to get swamped by the amount of information, and we're going to have to use things like AI and autonomics to be able to deal with that.
Yeah. Excellent. Did we have any questions in the audience? I can't actually see. How about this gentleman right here in the front?
Can artificial intelligence be used to detect, identify, and track fraudulent use and fraudulent users?
Can AI be used to track and find fraudulent users?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a debate on what is pure artificial intelligence versus what's machine learning.
Yeah.
But if you have broad enough data sets, that's something that in the financial services industry, they've been doing, you know, quite a bit. And you know, what you're going to start seeing are more of those sorts of closed loop systems where there's not even a person in the middle that says, hey, the computer says this is fraud, is this fraud? The computers are just going to operate on that, and they're going to, you know, shut down the accounts, or they're going to filter off a network. So yeah, they do that at a quality level approaching what sophisticated analysts are doing, and in a few years they'll surpass them.
And the flip side, not to be the voice of gloom and doom,
Well,
but
you are a lawyer.
I am a lawyer, law enforcement. But if the good guys can use AI, then the bad guys are going to try to figure out how to use AI. And the good guys try to look for patterns and identify, hey, who's a good guy I let in? And online advertising, what's a real person? And you know, what's a bot? And then the bad guys are...
I would guess the bad guys are ahead of us at this moment.
Well, and knowing this is an international audience, I think there could be a debate on who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, even. So I think that's...
Could you raise your hand if you're a bad guy? Just let us know now. It'll be fine.
Can you raise your hand if you think I'm a bad guy?
Well, whoever you are, the guy trying to steal your business or break into your network, your competitor, that'll be your bad guy.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to what do you do with that information? The thing I see with a lot of organizations is they have some level of AI or predictive, you know, analytics, but then they don't always act on it.
Yeah.
So you can be given a lot of information and be told what's happening and be told, you know, oh, there's a fraudulent activity, but you'd be amazed how many organizations have that information sitting there and don't act on it. And if you look at some of the breaches that have happened over the past 12 months, it was in there. There was someone that knew there was something happening. and some technology that was giving an alert.
And we'll make the AI and the machine learning better, is better data sets. And that's where, as an industry, we have a problem in sharing of information. And that's where you and your friend, you make friends at an event like this, and you've got to create those data sharing enclaves for incidents and breaches and things that you think might be anomalous and concerned about across organization, not within organization.
I agree. It's kind of the frenemy or co-opetition. It's like, what are we as an industry going to do to improve security as opposed to in silos? There was another question. Yes, sir. Yep.
Need like SPF 45 here. I'm getting a suntan.
I know, seriously. You guys don't understand how bright these lights are.
Oh, I know. My question is related to, and I'm trying to think of how to put this without starting a political argument.
That's okay. Start a political argument. We're good.
Okay,
It's Wednesday.
I'm thinking in terms of the government role in cybersecurity, in terms of, not in terms of policies, but in terms of their own ambitions and goals, in terms of things like surveillance, for example, encryption, backdoors, these types of policies for whatever it's used for. And I'm thinking not just US, but also China, Thailand, India, other regimes that have different kinds of views on this. And the security issues that also creates on the consumer level. If devices are required, for example, to have backdoors that the governments can access to investigate terrorist investigations, for example.
Right.
There's an argument in favor of that from a crime fighting perspective, but how do you balance the needs of what the government wants to be able to do with encryption, security, and so on, and balance the protection of consumers who use the technology?
I'll take the side that says the government just needs to get with the times, and I think that they're so far behind that they just still have this feeling that you can go to a switch somewhere and collect all that information. And the NSA does a pretty good job at that in certain places, but it's just not realistic to ask an Apple to put in a backdoor for a government, because then they will have to do that for every government. Their market share, they make less than half their money out of the U.S. In the U.S., and I'm talking, I guess, more to the U.S., you cannot set these sorts of policies for backdoor access. That's really, it's a backdoor for the government is a front door for the hackers, and it makes no sense. And all it's going to do is hurt American companies abroad, and I've seen a lot of this. They lose that competitive advantage because there is this fear that they only have some special access for the U.S. government where they come from. So I think it's a little bit, I think Pollyanna-ish on my view. I know we want to enable law enforcement to be able to catch the bad people. We want them to be able to break these Tor networks and find the child pornographers and all this. We all want that to happen, but we're just gonna have to find new tools, because the thing is, the thing that protects privacy, it does protect the criminals. It's the same technology. And we're going to have to find better ways to do that.
So with 20 years in government and prosecuting cyber criminals, I definitely understand government's desire to get evidence. And if you're a prosecutor doing national security and there's evidence or data in this box, you want to be able to get in it. So I definitely understand where they're coming from. I don't agree with some of the ways they're making their argument, and I think it definitely oversimplifies a number of things in the argument. And I think for me, being conscious of my own privacy and security, it kind of comes down to, if you're out in the Wild West and there's no law enforcement and they're not really protecting you, 911 call won't get you a cop in 2 minutes. So it wouldn't be fair for the government to say you cannot have a firearm in your house in the middle of nowhere. So here, where cybercrime is just so rampant and we're not doing a good job at catching cyber criminals, it seems hard for government to tell people, we've got to weaken your security a little bit, and whatever they might say about a backdoor, that it's secure. Look, if you put a sunroof in the roof of your house, you might need it, you might want the light, but that's where the water's going to come in eventually. You're weakening it.
Well, and what's interesting is we put so much weight often on these data sovereignty rules that, the EU, Japan, a lot of countries and regions are increasingly doing this, where data can't leave the state or the region or the territory. One, cyber criminals don't care. They don't follow those data sovereignties, so they'll take your data wherever they want to. But I think also we overplay the fact that nobody else can access that, or if the U.S. government, really wants your data and it's sitting in Britain, that they won't be able to get it. And I think that's also quite naive because we've seen it happen a lot.
Well, I think that we kind of expect that to be the job of like the security agencies for any government, that they will kind of do those things. They'll cross the line to try and get information to protect their country. But industry has to stop cooperating with them. That's the issue, because then it creates, bigger issues, lack of trust. And people, you need to have a very normalized view of this. So you think of like tax policy that causes a company not to offshore all their assets and funds. It's the same thing with these sorts of policies.
That's actually a good analogy.
So you'll look at companies, they may leave the US if it's too onerous in terms of these sorts of security requirements.
Interesting. Was there another question?
Yeah, so I had a question. We live in a world where increasingly everything needs to be fast and rapidly deployed and rapid application development. The challenges with that, security is almost an afterthought. And my question to you was particularly, you as a CSA, Cloud Security Alliance head, what are you doing to give tools to in hands of developers so that they can develop standard practices for the cloud security or security of their applications? I know
So
AWS
secure
has
development
done a
practices.
It's absolutely true. We've gone from an age where you would upgrade software maybe once or twice a year to now it happens 10 or 20 times a day. And so a key area of research we're in is this combination of DevOps, which is just really moving software development to more and more agile ways, and security, which is called DevSecOps. And there's been some real fascinating presentations. It's actually been quite frightening if you're a big information security product company, because they're talking about, hey, you use the cloud and you put these scripts together and you basically built something that's better and enterprise grade, and you can use it to solve very specific, unique problems. So that's an area of research that we have our guidance version for that's coming out later this year. That's an area we're going to be focused on. There's a lot more work we need to do there. Yes, we need to build in security where we can. We also need to understand there's some aspect of the genie's out of the bottle, and there will be a lot of broken technology that's going to get implemented. And so this is a way, again, delivering security through cloud and doing it very agile with DevSecOps, I think is going to enable us to be able to deal with this massive scale increase that we're going to need to handle.
We also were chatting yesterday a little bit about looking to the open source model and how that community works together in development, but also in security, and how that could be a model that these organizations could look at as well.
Yeah, I think we need to take that open source approach to how we share information, how we share incidents, how we share best practices. And we can't think of this analogy I say is information security today. It works like a private fire department, and we try to put out the fire at our house, and we watch the house next to us burn down.
Right.
We can't do that. There's like John was saying, it's like the bad guys can use all these tools too. If the good people don't collaborate, then we're going to be in a world of
It's
hurt.
like we all looked at Sony and went, whoa, I'm so glad that wasn't me. But
Yeah.
it's just a matter of time. We had a question here in the very front. I don't know if you got a microphone, but we'll take one more before we wrap up here.
Yes, to follow up on the question there about is the government kind of a fire department? Is it really, strong enough? Are we spending enough, money to make us collectively more secure?
I think the government is becoming largely more irrelevant to the issues of how we secure industries, and they can have some good guidelines. If they could do a better job just securing themselves, that would be great, because they don't do a very good job of that. So I just think it's up to us. Even I think the things like active defense, where you actually strike back, which is very controversial, that you go hack back against someone who you think's attacking you. I think we're going to see more in that, because I just think government's overwhelmed.
I think we have to expect more from government, and I think attacking back, I definitely would not recommend that. I understand people's frustration, but Government should be there to protect us and apprehend at least some of the perpetrators. And when so many people are committing these crimes and getting away with it, they can keep attacking and trying again and again with impunity.
The other side is the FBI, though, may say, hey, we only will help you if it's like a $10 million issue or anything like that. They just don't have enough resources to help.
This almost would be a great separate debate, because you
And
guys are
that's the
coming
problem.
from
We
different
need to- we
perspectives.
need to
Do more,
demand
do
more.
less, relevant, irrelevant. So in our last couple seconds here, what would you have people leave with? So if they remember nothing else, is there something that you want them to go back from this conference and start doing right now?
Number one, prepare to purchase my book that's coming out, 'cause that'll be good.
Oh,
But seriously.
I did not mean to hand him that softball, just to be clear.
Seriously, secure yourself, your family, your devices. I think the security starts with you. You don't want to be the weak link, and start thinking about, hey, what can the bad guys do to steal my data or make it unavailable to me?
Jim?
Buy his book, focus on data, strong factor authentication, encryption, and then don't be afraid of, but embrace these newer technologies, because they are going to be the way you're going to solve these problems. And again, the bad guys are embracing them anyway.
Great. Thank you both so much. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right.